If you've ever watched videos of Indian unboxers online, one thought probably crossed your mind. How do they eat hot pot? The broth is boiling at over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Do they just plunge their bare hands in to grab the ingredients? It's a funny question, but it touches upon one of the biggest misconceptions about Indian cuisine. We Vietnamese often associate India with eating with hands, but most don't realize that this eating with hands only applies to certain dishes within a very specific set of rules. And when you understand it correctly, you'll see that Indians eat hot pot just as civilly as the Vietnamese, Chinese, Thai, Japanese, or Koreans. To answer the question of how Indians eat hot pot, given the perception of eating with hands, we have to start from the beginning. Indians don't eat every dish with their hands. They only use their right hand, specifically the thumb and two fingers, to handle dry, sticky, or slightly pasty foods, such as rice mixed with curry, their various types of bread, and foods with a somewhat solid consistency. The essence of eating with hands in Indian culinary culture is about controlling the food. Anything too hot, too liquid, drippy, or uncontrollable will be avoided. This is because the right hand is both an eating utensil and considered the clean part of the body. Therefore, dishes like broth, thin soups, boiling foods, or anything too runny, generally things not convenient for handling with hands, don't follow the right-hand rule. Don't. If you imagine an Indian plunging their hand into a boiling hot pot to grab a piece of meat, rest assured, that doesn't happen. No ordinary Indian would do that, and it would even be considered culturally inappropriate.
What?
But before we talk about how Indians eat hot pot, it's important to acknowledge something. Traditional Indian culture doesn't really have a dish that's defined like hot pot. In Vietnam, China, Japan, or Korea, Indians have hundreds of curry dishes and thousands of variations of other dishes. But the concept of sitting around a boiling pot of broth, dipping pieces of meat, adding vegetables and noodles continuously, is almost non-existent in their long history. There are a few major reasons why hot pot never really originated in India. One reason is the hot climate. Another is that their culture primarily revolves around eating bread, and they prefer foods with a thicker consistency. Let's talk about the climate first. India is one of the hottest countries in the world, with some regions reaching over 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. In that heat, the food culture naturally leans towards dishes that aren't too hot, or if they are, only slightly so, like a thick, dense curry that doesn't release too much steam. Hot pot, where the broth is boiling vigorously and steam is rising intensely, is clearly not suited to such a climate. Imagine sitting around a boiling pot of hot pot in the middle of summer. No one could stand it. Therefore, hot pot isn't a national dish or a common dish in India. It only appeared when foreign cuisines flooded the major cities in recent decades. Secondly, Indians don't typically eat hot pot because their culture is centered around eating bread, dips, and using their hands. Indians use various types of bread as their main meal, along with rice. They also use spoons and forks normally. It's not like they never use them. The dishes that go well with bread are those with a certain thickness, density, and texture for smearing, scooping, and dipping. Hot pot broth, on the other hand, is too thin. You can't dip bread into it or gather it with your hands or bread. So, structurally, hot pot doesn't fit with India's hand-eating culture. Another reason is taste. Indians are accustomed to eating foods that are rich, spicy, strong, and heavily seasoned. A clear broth Japanese hot pot or a delicately flavored traditional hot pot might be too bland for them, given their palates are already accustomed to so many different kinds of spices and complex flavors. Even Thai hot pot, when it enters India, must be adjusted to be spicier and more flavorful.
Yo.
So why are we starting to see Indians eating hot pot nowadays? Simply because hot pot is now globalized. Major cities like Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, and others have many Thai, Japanese, and even Sichuan hot pot restaurants.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Indians eat hot pot there, exactly like foreigners. They still use ladles, spoons, and chopsticks if they know how, and they never use their hands. When a hot pot is placed in front of them, they treat it as a foreign dish and eat according to foreign rules. The issue is, how exactly do they eat it? The answer is simple. They use a yo spoon to sip the broth and a ladle, or slotted spoon, to retrieve the ingredients. If the restaurant provides chopsticks, they'll try to use them, and if they're not comfortable, they'll switch to a fork or ladle. Dipped items are never brought to the mouth directly by hand because they're wet and too hot, falling outside the range of foods permissible to eat with hands.
Yeah.
Interestingly, even when eating curry, a dish typically eaten with hands, Indians don't eat it when it's piping hot. They wait for the food to cool to a moderate temperature before using their hands. The hand needs to retain its sensitivity in order to gather the food delicately. Therefore, plunging a hand into a boiling pot of hot pot is not only illogical, but also contrary to their culture. In reality, when eating international hot pot in India, they usually follow a few steps. First, they let the hot pot broth boil and add the ingredients using tongs or a ladle. Then, when the ingredients are cooked, they also remove them with a ladle, spoon, or chopsticks if they know how to use them. Finally, they eat each piece just like a Vietnamese person eats ingredients from a bowl of pho or canh, soup, sipping a few spoonfuls of broth if desired. The important thing is that there's absolutely no grabbing food from the hot pot with their hands. But there are some interesting exceptions. Some restaurants serve Indian-style hot pot, which is a modified version of hot pot with an Indian twist. The hot pot broth isn't a normal broth. It's diluted curry. The servers will put vegetables, meat, or cheese into the curry hot pot and cook it together. When eating, they'll scoop it out with a spoon. Sometimes they'll tear off a piece of bread or roti to dip into the diluted curry broth.
So,
this makes it similar to hot pot in appearance. That is, there's a shared pot in the middle of the table, but the essence is still a shared type of curry. So, Indian hot pot isn't really hot pot. In addition, India has a very famous dish in night markets called tawa masala. It's cooked on a large, flat griddle, often as big as a tabletop. People put meat, vegetables, various butters, and all sorts of spices into it, stirring and mixing it together while cooking into a thick and fragrant mixture. This dish looks like dry Chinese hot pot because there's shared cooking and eating, but it's not hot pot because there's no broth, no dipping, and no rising steam. People just tear off bread and dip it into the sauce on the griddle in true Indian style. Another interesting thing is that they don't have a habit of using a lot of broth like in Vietnam. For Vietnamese people, for example, a hot pot's quality lies in the broth. But for Indians, the broth is only secondary. They're more concerned with the spices, the richness, and the fattiness of the dish. And strangely enough, many Indians lose the sense of deliciousness if they eat something too watery. Therefore, hot pot, which is based on clear broth, almost doesn't hit the taste buds of the majority. Religion also influences the issue of eating from a shared pot. In Indian culture, especially with Hinduism and Jainism, having one's food touch a shared pot can be taboo if the pot contains meat or something they don't eat.
Whoa.
For example, Hindus abstain from beef, Muslims abstain from pork, and Jains abstain from all kinds of meat. If a hot pot has beef, pork, chicken, and seafood all at the same time, many people won't eat it because the food has been contaminated with each other. This is also a reason why hot pot hasn't developed strongly in Indian society. But despite those cultural barriers, when Japanese, Korean, and Thai hot pot are introduced to major cities in India, they still eat it. They still use ladles to sip the broth and use slotted ladles to scoop mushrooms from the pot. And if it's a spicy Sichuan hot pot, they might even like the flavor. So when you see an Indian person sitting and eating hot pot in a video filmed somewhere, don't be surprised. It's still a common occurrence in a modern city, and no one is dipping their hands into the hot pot. One of the most interesting truths is that Indians are extremely afraid of burning their hands, because the right hand is their main eating tool. If the hand gets too hot or loses sensation, they won't be able to pick up and eat the food. Therefore, they don't pick up food that's too hot, too watery, or too soft, and easily falls apart. That's why, when Indians eat hot pot, no matter how delicious the food is, they'll always use a ladle, chopsticks, or a spoon. They never touch it with their hands. Thank you for watching this story. And if you found it interesting, you can click the subscribe scene button, turn on notifications, and share it. And now, I'll say goodbye.